You come home. Something has been destroyed: a pillow, a shoe, the corner of the couch. And there, before you've even said a word, is your dog, head low, ears flat, eyes averted, body shrinking toward the floor. You know that look. Every dog owner knows that look. And you know exactly what it means. Your dog feels guilty. Except it doesn't. And the reason why, what that look actually is, and what it means your dog is experiencing in that moment, changes everything about how you understand the animal that trusts you more than anything in its world. Let's start with the obvious reading, because it genuinely sounds reasonable. The dog made a mess. You came home. The dog looks guilty. That is a sequence that makes sense. Cause, effect, remorse. We read that same sequence in other humans every day. But here is the problem. For guilt to be real, the dog would need to mentally travel back in time, connect a past action to a present consequence, and generate an emotion about its own behavior. That is not a simple trick. That is one of the most cognitively complex things a mind can do. And there is no evidence dogs can do it. Dogs learn by association. Behavior is followed by consequence, and the two are linked in the nervous system. But that window is tiny. We're talking 1 to 2 seconds. Find the destroyed pillow an hour later, walk in with your jaw tight and your voice already carrying weight, and the dog cannot connect what you're feeling to what it did. That gap is simply too wide. The association never forms. So if the dog isn't replaying the crime, what is it reading? It is reading you. In 2009, Alexandra Horowitz at Barnard College ran a controlled experiment designed to test exactly this. Owners were told their dogs had eaten a treat they weren't supposed to eat. Some dogs actually had, others hadn't. Then the owners came back in and interacted with their dogs, and the guilty look appeared regardless of whether the dog had done anything wrong at all. Dogs that had behaved perfectly looked just as guilty when their owners believed they'd misbehaved. Dogs that had actually eaten the treat showed fewer appeasement behaviors when their owners came in calm and relaxed. The look was never about the act. It was always about the owner, not what the dog did, what you looked like walking through that door. And once you understand that, the behavior stops looking like confession. It starts looking like something else entirely. Something older and more urgent and considerably more uncomfortable to sit with. Dogs evolved alongside wolves for tens of thousands of years before they lived with us. And in pack social structure, one of the most critical skills a lower-ranking animal could have was the ability to de-escalate a dominant individual quickly, to turn off aggression before it became physical. The way you do that is by making yourself small. You look away, you lower your head, you tuck your tail, you move slowly, you expose your throat. Every element of the behavior we call the guilty look is a direct catalog of appeasement signaling, a hardwired protocol for surviving the approach of someone more powerful who is not happy. Your dog is not confessing. Your dog is trying to turn off what it perceives as a threat, and the threat is you. In canine social language, direct eye contact is a dominant signal. It means challenge. It means I am not backing down. So when your dog averts its gaze while you're standing over it with your voice raised and your posture forward and your face tight, it is not looking away in shame. It is breaking eye contact the same way it would with a stranger staring it down on the street. The most intimate request you make in that moment, look at me, own what you did, is the exact request that reads as aggression. The dog can't look at you, not because it is ashamed, because you look dangerous. Here is what makes this harder to absorb. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to do anything dramatic. Before you've crossed the room, before you've said a single word, your dog already knows something is wrong. Dogs can detect human stress hormones olfactorily. Your body chemistry shifts when you're angry. Cortisol rises, adrenaline moves, and your dog registers that change the moment you open the door, before you see the mess, before you react, sometimes before you've even consciously processed what happened. The scolding begins for the dog before the owner opens their mouth. The look that appears in that moment isn't a reaction to your words. It is a reaction to the person you've already become by the time you find the damage. And inside that small body, crouched on the floor in front of you, Something real is happening. When a dog enters an appeasement response, its nervous system is not calm. It has entered sympathetic activation, what we'd recognize as fight, flight, or freeze. Cortisol is rising, heart rate is elevated, the body is braced. This is the same physiological state as genuine threat response, not a minor flicker of discomfort. A stress cascade in an animal whose only goal in that moment is to make the person they love most stop feeling like a predator. The dog isn't being dramatic. Its body is doing exactly what bodies do when they register danger. Now, here is the part that is hardest to hear. One moment of this doesn't damage a dog. Dogs are resilient, they recover. But what happens when this pattern repeats? Week after week, the same sequence. Something is found, you come home carrying something the dog reads as threat. The appeasement display activates. You take it as confirmation that your dog understood, and you move on. What does that repetition build? Dogs that live under chronic unpredictability. Environments where threat arrives without pattern, where the same person who gives safety also sometimes becomes frightening. Show measurable differences over time. Elevated baseline cortisol, less willingness to initiate play, reduced exploratory behavior. These are not dramatic signs. They are quiet ones, easy to miss, easy to explain away. But they are signs that a nervous system is spending more of its resources on monitoring and less on living. The dog still loves you. That part doesn't go away. But underneath the love, quietly, something else has been built. A layer of wariness, an uncertainty about when you might become the version of yourself that feels dangerous, not because you are cruel. Because the dog doesn't have the cognitive equipment to distinguish between the time you came home angry at the traffic and the time you came home and found the mess. It reads your state, not your cause. And this is where the guilt display becomes the cruelest trick of all. The more distressed the dog, the more expressive the appeasement behavior. The more the dog cowers and averts and flattens, the more convincing the performance of guilt becomes. So the owners who feel most satisfied by a visible, dramatic guilt response are very often watching the most frightened dogs. The dogs that have learned the hardest lesson, that this person's displeasure requires a full and convincing demonstration of submission to be turned off. The satisfaction is the tell. That look isn't proof your dog has a conscience. It is a measure of how much your dog has learned to be afraid. Here is what actually works. Dogs cannot learn from retrospective consequence. They cannot connect a destroyed shoe to a scolding delivered 40 minutes later. What they can learn from is the removal of opportunity, the shoe put away, the room closed, the unsupervised time reduced. What they can learn from is real-time redirection. Caught in the moment, given an alternative reinforced when they choose it. Not aftermath, not confession, not emotional reckoning, prevention and guidance. That is what changes behavior. The rest is theater that costs your dog something you can't see. And the wariness that builds it isn't permanent. That is the piece that matters most. A nervous system that has learned to brace around a particular person can learn to unlearn it. Not overnight, but through repetition of something different, through enough moments of calm, of safety, of a person who comes home and simply is not dangerous. The baseline shifts back. The dog's expectation of you can be rewritten. The trust that feels like it was always there can actually become the thing it only looked like. One day, your dog will look directly at you during a moment when everything is still. No drama, no damage, no reason for either of you to be anything other than what you are to each other. It won't hold the eye contact for long. It will look away because it wants to, not because it is afraid, and you will know the difference between those two things now. That is what it looks like when a dog is not afraid of you. If this changed something in how you see your dog, I'd love to know. Drop a comment below and tell me, has your dog ever given you that look? And now that you know what it actually was, what do you feel? Because there is another look your dog makes, one most owners also misread completely. The one where your dog goes completely still, like stone, just before something goes wrong. That stillness is not random. It is the last word in a conversation your dog has been having with you for minutes. And the next video is about everything you missed before that moment arrived.